Living in Victorian England was hard for most people, none more so than unmarried mothers who had been shunned by a judgemental society and cast out into urine-stained streets. To survive, their only option would have been to seek employment in the workhouses or turn to prostitution just to feed themselves. And with a baby, that would have been impossible. With no other option, desperate mothers started getting rid of their children. The unlucky ones were simply dumped in the back streets, with many being crushed to death by unsuspecting carriages or dying of cold or starvation. A few lucky ones would have been passed to Victorian foster parents, nicknamed baby farmers. These surrogate mothers housed many children and looked after them the best they could, and for the most part, this worked fine. But when it became lucrative and profitable business to take in as many babies as possible, and after being paid for their services, instead of caring for them, many were physically ripped from their mother's womb during childbirth and strangled even before they could take their first breath. And many hundreds of others were simply drugged and left to starve to death, just to make more space. In this real twisted tale, we'll find out about one of these baby farmers and just how far she was prepared to go to satisfy her greed. Let's begin. It was a dark and gloomy time in Victorian England in the early 1800s. There was very little work, especially for young women, with most having to turn to prostitution just to survive. With the increase of illegitimate births, the dirty, urine-drenched cobbled streets and dark alleyways of many towns and cities ended up riddled with abandoned infants and the rotting corpses of newborn babies. Many were left on doorsteps wrapped up in cloth to keep them warm by their desperate mothers, in the vain hope they would be taken in and cared for by loving adoptive parents. And those lucky enough to survive on the streets for longer than a few days struggled to live to their 5th birthday. They simply died of disease or starvation. With unfair laws actively removing the father's responsibility to support the child, and abortions not an option, women, unable to support themselves, had no choice but to find a way of getting rid of their babies. Hidden away from the prying eyes of a judgmental society were houses full of unwanted babies and children. Left in the care of the baby farmers, these Victorian foster parents would be paid to take care of the child. And in a lot of cases, this worked well, and the child would be looked after until the mother returned or until the child was old enough to survive on its own. But baby farming became a lucrative business where a lot of money could be made, but only if you took in a lot of children. Lots of children meant lots of space and lots of costs, like food and clothing. But one evil woman came up with a plan to trick desperate mothers into paying a one-off fee for their child with the promise they would be found new adoptive parents. But little did they know, they were simply paying to have their precious baby killed, usually within hours of being left. Amelia Dyer, the youngest of 5 children, was born in 1837 in Bristol, England, to a respectable family. She learned to read and write and developed a love of literature and poetry. But her child would soon be ruined after her mother contracted the disease typhus. A couple of weeks after being infected, most probably from lice, Amelia's mother would have started becoming delirious, showing signs of madness, and would have violent fits. Amelia, being only 11, would have been obliged to care for her during this time, and this no doubt affected her badly. In fact, it was reported that Amelia claimed that her mother died of hereditary insanity, something we now know simply would not have been the case. After her mother's death in 1848, she was sent to live with an aunt, but due to her father's shoemaking business being inherited by her older brother, Amelia became permanently estranged from her family. By 1861, aged just 24, she married George Thomas, a man more than twice her age. But life was now settled. She was happy, and so she decided to train as a nurse. It wasn't long before Amelia found out how to put her training to use when she took in a lodger, a midwife called Ellen Dane. She told Amelia about the business of baby farming and the extra money that could be made from it. This opportunity was never far from her mind. 2 years later, Amelia fell pregnant with her first child, who she called Ellen, and was forced to leave nursing as Victorian women were not allowed to work if they were pregnant. Sadly, in 1869, her elderly and frail husband George died. Faced with the hard reality of being alone with a child and no income, Amelia made the fateful decision to open a baby farm. With the knowledge she had gained while in nursing and the advice given by Ellen Dane, Amelia was well prepared to start taking in pregnant women or unwanted babies. But there was a problem: her daughter. Baby farming meant moving around to different towns, and having a child in tow would not have been easy. So she made the chilling decision to farm out her own child, passing over the sobbing child to her adoptive mother and handing over a small fee. Amelia turned away, shut the door, and never saw her daughter again. And I can't help but hope that saved that little girl's life. Within days, Amelia started posting adverts in local papers with messages like, "Married couple with no family would adopt healthy child, nice country home, terms £10. These deceptive words probably seemed a better outlook than others, so it wouldn't be long before desperate women were paying her for her services. However, instead of using the money to feed and care for the child, Amelia kept it all. The starving babies soon began crying out for food, but instead of feeding them, Amelia gave them a Victorian medicine chillingly called the quiet nurse, an over-the-counter mixture containing the drug opium and brandy. This had the effect of dulling the child's senses and stopped it from crying out in hunger. And so it wouldn't be long before the poor, innocent child died of starvation. Even though she had mastered the process of killing babies efficiently, it wasn't long before her gruesome business was about to be halted. By the end of the 1860s, the English government was concerned over the large scale of infant deaths within society, and after the arrest, trial and hanging of a high-profile baby farmer, Margaret Waters, and the state now hunting others, Amelia went into hiding. With the police getting close, she put herself into the safety of a mental asylum by pretending to be insane, an act she probably mastered due to seeing how her mother became during the last days of her life. After her release in 1872, Amelia seemed like she was a reformed character, even getting married to her second husband, William Dyer, a brewer's labourer from Bristol. They had 2 children, Mary Ann, also known as Polly, and William Samuel, and things were quite settled until her husband lost his job and the money stopped. After leaving her husband, Amelia once again turned to baby farming for money, and the murders continued. For a few years, she was able to evade the attention of the police, but was eventually caught in 1879 after a doctor became suspicious due to the number of deaths in her care. And you would have thought that this evil, twisted woman would have been sent to the gallows. But no, the courts only sentenced her to 6 months hard labour due to not enough evidence. That was less time given to someone in Victorian times for stealing food. 6 months passed and Amelia was out, once again murdering poor innocent children. But this time she stepped up the killing spree. Gone was the slow process of poisoning the babies and the danger of requesting a doctor's death certificate. Amelia had a more efficient disposal method. Babies, sometimes up to 6 a day, 6 babies a day, were being dropped off by unsuspecting mothers, reassured that their children would be cared for, and found new adoptive families. But little did they know, just moments after being left, they would be dead. Taking a length of white dressmaking edging tape, she would wind it slowly around their necks, tie a knot tightly and wait. Death would not have been instant, but instead the poor, helpless infant would have struggled to take a breath. Held in the arms of their executioner, the last thing they would have seen would have been the emotionless face of Amelia Dyer. With the little life gone, Amelia would wrap up the still warm corpse in brown paper, tie it with string and find the closest river to dispose of the remains. This inhumane killing of babies and children continued for nearly 10 years, until in 1890 she was contacted by a young governess who had fallen pregnant by the master of the house. Gaining her trust, Amelia convinced her to leave her baby once it was born. 2 months passed and the young governess returned to see her child, but was presented with a baby she knew wasn't hers. Checking it carefully and unable to find a birthmark gave her the proof she needed, and the police were called. With the chance of another prison sentence looming, Amelia seemingly once again succumbed to bouts of madness and hysteria and was placed back into a mental institution. Once again, her ability to evade real punishment was given away to the relative comfort of a medical ward. In 1895 she was released again and got ready to start slaughtering children, but this time she was about to make a big mistake. Amelia had recruited the help of Jane Smith, a widow she had met during her time in the workhouse. Jane had been seduced by Amelia's tales of how she was going to rescue pregnant mothers and unwanted children, but started becoming suspicious due to the high turnaround of children coming in and out of the house. On the 30th of March 1896, while cleaning, Jane came across an awful smell coming from one of the cupboards. Opening the door, she was hit by the putrid smell of rotting flesh coming from a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. Before she could investigate further, Amelia entered the room. Startled, Jane dropped to her knees and continued scrubbing the floor. With a questioning look, Amelia took hold of the parcel, announced that she was going out to take some old clothes to the pawn shop, and left the house. A couple of days later, a bargeman who was working on the Thames at the time came across a package floating in the water. It was the same parcel Amelia had left the house with. Unwrapping it, he came across the gruesome sight of a decomposed body of a baby girl who would later be identified as Helena Fry. Investigating police checked the awful discovery for any clues. Amelia, in her haste to get rid of the parcel quickly, had mistakenly left an old address label on it. It was the proof the police needed to arrest Amelia, so she was taken into custody. Raiding her home, they found cupboards full of children's clothes, receipts of adoptions, and hundreds of letters from mothers. Over the following days, the River Thames was dredged and over 50 bodies of babies and children were discovered, with white tape tied around their necks. Amelia later told police that was how you could tell it was one of mine. Crucially, they found a carpet bag containing the bodies of 4-month-old Doris Marmon and 13-month-old Harry Simmons. The bag was identified as being owned by an older boy who was living in Amelia's house at the time, and this evidence was enough to charge her with murder. On the 22nd of May 1896, Amelia Dyer appeared at the Old Bailey in London and pleaded guilty to the murder of Doris Marmon. It took the jury only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty. On Wednesday the 10th of June 1896, just before 9 a.m, Amelia Dyer walked out of her cold, dark prison cell and stood on the gallows at Newgate Prison. When asked if she had anything to say, she replied with nothing. The city's executioner then tied the noose tightly around her neck, stood back off the platform and pulled the lever. Dropping through the opening, the rope went taut and broke her neck, killing her instantly. Her reign of terror was over. Amelia Dyer spent a lifetime murdering poor innocent children for money. It's estimated she starved, strangled and killed over 400 infants in her care over a 30-year period, making her one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Thankfully though, some good did come from this evil, twisted woman, as after her death, new stricter laws on adoption and child protection were introduced. It also helped raise the profile of the NSPCC, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children here in England, who will make sure nothing ever happens like this again. Hi, thanks for watching our real twisted tale, Amelia Dyer, a mother who murdered for money. If you enjoyed it, then please hit that like button and consider sharing. If you really like what we do, then please subscribe. It will really help us out. Good night and keep safe.